Hi, everyone. It's Janice, host of the Divorcing Religion podcast. Thanks for tuning into my show, whether you're joining me on audio or video. I've heard from some folks recently who have told me just how much the show has meant, and some of them have even found it not only to be life-changing, but life-saving, as they felt there was no one else who understood what they were going through, and they found the Divorcing Religion podcast, and they started feeling encouraged. Please help me keep my show on the air. Become a member by clicking the join button on the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. My guest today is author David Fitzgerald. David is an award-winning writer, historical researcher, and atheist activist who lectures internationally at universities and secular events, and is a frequent guest on many fine podcasts. David has been a passionate advocate for atheism, civil rights, counter-apologetics, and secular humanism his entire adult life. He is best known for his books Nailed and The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, including Jesus, Mything in Action. His latest book is Playing God, An Evolutionary History of World Religion. Wow. Welcome, David. I'm so glad you would join me on the Divorcing Religion podcast.
Thanks for having me. I got chills hearing that intro. It's like, yeah, these are amazing, aren't they?
Yeah, boy, oh boy, you're really something. I'm just putting the finishing touches on my book, and that's just one book, and it took me 4 years, so I can't imagine. And then I know you also do some fiction writing on top, so you're a good writer.
Thank you. I'm saying so.
I have some questions about your early life. I'm wondering how religion impacted you, because at this point, you obviously, have distanced yourself quite a bit from being a believer. Did you grow up in a believing household?
I sure did. Southern Baptist, the one true faith. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and it's funny because I was just a true blue, bought it all the way, hook, line, and sinker Baptist. Well until I should have known better. Well, and it wasn't until my college years that all changed. But people thought I was going to be a preacher. It just, I was that kind of guy. It's like always had the proper Baptist answer for everything.
Mm-hmm. And then what happened?
It's funny. It's funny because I know I have all these friends in the Clergy Project who are preachers and pastors and rabbis and what have you for years, and they talk about the agony of the soul that they just over the years just got crawled, further and further towards unbelief. But I can remember the moment I was this Southern Baptist boy, and the moment's like, whoa, nothing anymore. So let me tell you the story because so. It starts with a girl, because the way I would flirt with this girl is we would have theological arguments with each other. Mm-hmm. And so one day we're going at it, and I was always given the proper Baptist response, and she would always give the hippie Renaissance fair sci-fi fan response. And she goes, well, Dave, the Hindu religion is like 3,000 years older than Christianity. And I was all set to jump down her case. And before a word could get out of my mouth, I realized, you know what? I have no idea if Hinduism is older than Christianity or not. Turns out it is, but
Mm-hmm.
at that moment, all I could think was, I'm just like the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. I'm just repeating what I was taught. And the talking heads, I had this little David Byrne on my shoulder saying, am I right or am I wrong? My God, what have I done?
That's right.
And it was this secular epiphany from that instant on. I mean, I never even got the sentence out. I didn't have to say a word. It's like Christianity never felt real to me after that. It felt obviously fake. And I would just daze. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Because, you live your whole life being told the truth and defending the truth and being brought up to truth. But you never ask, is this the truth right here? What we're saying? And to ask myself that question and go, I don't know that it is. It was bizarre to me. I call it my secular epiphany.
Yeah.
Because I'd been a Cambodian missionary in Fresno during the time, and like a month after that, I'm out. Sorry, I didn't say anything. I just stopped going, and
Wow.
yeah, because it just looked and felt obviously fake. And it wasn't like, now I'm going to give evolution a start and check it out and see if it matches. It's like, no, of course evolution was true. Of course.
Mhm. Yeah.
That the pressure of having to resist all this pure, rational, scientific evidence for the Bible not being true just came crashing down in that one instance, And
Wow. I was in my 40s, or I was
Mm.
approaching 40 before I actually started really questioning and shaking my head. But it was still years after that until
Yeah.
I watched the video series with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers
Oh,
on YouTube about the power
yeah.
of myth. And I heard that learned man talking about just saying that, lots of other religions have a feature of virgin birth. And
Yeah.
my jaw dropped. And now I recommend all my clients that at some time in their life, I want them to watch that video series because it was incredibly eye-opening for me. I had already left the faith, but I still wasn't sure about what I believed and what I didn't believe. So you had this fantastic moment with hippie lady. Thank you. If you're listening, we're grateful to you.
Yeah.
And that kind of jolted you to reality. How did your folks manage that, or how did those conversations go?
it's
Do
funny
they know,
because-
David? Do they know?
It turns out they knew. Well, I mean, after I stopped going to church and then later moved in with my girlfriend at the time, living in sin, I just assumed they'd all get the message. But before I moved from Fresno to San Francisco, I decided, you know what, I should just have a little talk with them. And I told them, I don't even know why I'm having this talk, because I mean, clearly but I'm not a Christian anymore. And it was like, what? It's funny because my mom was raised in Oklahoma, Southern Baptist, to a very controlling grandma. We love grandma, but she was just kind of always under her thumb.
Yeah.
Dad grew up in the boonies, and he was really the only one in his brother and sisters who actually went and became a Christian at the time. I guess he was the first, actually. But so I thought she would get it and he would not. Exact opposite. He got it, and she was freaked out and still doesn't accept it. But it was wild. It was.
What about siblings?
Once I did that, they could do no wrong. So it's like they were very grateful that at least I'm not an atheist like Dave. But, so I really blazed a trail for them that they're still thanking me for. But the funny thing was what you were saying about how it took all this time to get over that. Totally get that. I mean, it was an instant to realize. It's not even like I made a decision. It's like all of a sudden my eyes opened and it's like, wait a second, this is all bullshit. It just looked, felt, smelled, everything. It just never felt real after that. And but the irony was, I had always walked around, Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky Baptist guy. God's got a perfect plan for me, and He keeps me from harm. Nothing can hurt me. No, not David Fitzgerald. And all of a sudden, that's gone. And I remember telling people, it's like you're in an airplane, the bottom drops out, but I'm still flying and not falling. And it took me the longest time to just kind of get my feet again. But the most amazing thing, I think, was not just like accepting basic scientific tenets felt so good, but I wasn't walking around like a judgmental idiot anymore going, oh, you believe this, you're going to hell. You believe that, you're going to heaven, like the Terminator. All of a sudden, we're all human. All of us, even the people who believe crazy things, even the people who don't look like me, don't talk like me, we're all human. And it is amazing how much more Christ-like I became with love for people when I gave up Christianity.
Yeah, I totally recognize and can relate to that. And my parents were Christians as well. I was raised in a Pentecostal family, and my dad was very fundamentalist, and my mom was much more liberal. And I remember as a kid asking my mom, she was in the kitchen, of course, I was asking her, what about people in other countries who don't believe, who've never believed because it's not part of their belief system? And she said, well, I imagine Jesus will make allowances for all those people, you know. And then I asked my dad, and he's like, they're going to hell. That's obvious. So that
Yeah,
was just kind of
right.
living with two parents under the same roof
Oh,
who proposed to follow the same belief system, but
and
it was so different.
it's kind of perfect because you can't illustrate that cognitive dissonance any better. Um,
Mhm,
I mean, when I was a
mhm,
kid, I loved dinosaurs, and yet somehow I believed Adam and Eve were a real thing at the same time.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, juggling that God is love, but everyone's going to hell unless they do just exactly these things. It's nice that you get that right on display right from the get go. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. And I remember asking my dad at some point when I was a kid about dinosaurs and about cavemen, and he kind of had a blustery response to the effect of, "Don't look so closely at those things," or don't ask those.
oh, pay attention to that man behind the curtain.
That's that's right. And then when I was married to my first husband, and we were at Bible college, and there was this article I saw about something called the God helmet, and people would put it on, and it would
Yes,
stimulate
that
different parts
magnetic
of the
resonance.
brain
Yeah.
and make them feel like there was a God there or something. And I remember I read it to my husband. He just looked at me, and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I think you better put that magazine away, and we won't read that anymore."
Exactly.
And
Oh,
I've never forgotten about that. But now, all these years later, I'm married to a scientist and an atheist, and I still, even all these years later, have trouble really integrating and fully accepting evolution. I read about it, I talk about it, it's a fact.
yeah.
But my childhood indoctrination was so it's so tenacious in there, like chewing
Yeah.
gum in my brain.
Well,
And
I
I
mean, it's demonized right from the cradle when you're
oh
there.
yeah.
It's like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, carbon dating. Oh, that
Oh
guard.
yeah.
Clearly, it was a talking snake. It
Yeah.
clearly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Which one is harder to believe? And I attended all the Answers in Genesis. Went to all those seminars.
Oh,
Supported them financially for years.
oh,
And that's the one thing that still I just had to finally come to terms with. You know what? There might be a part of me that just always struggles with that, and that has to be okay. That's just one of the things
I mean,
that I'm going to have to
honestly,
struggle with.
honestly, if everybody can take away the things that were done to you as a kid, you have no control over that. But you can be kind to yourself, and whatever you have to do, whatever gets you through that, that's okay.
Thank you
I
for
kind of
saying
have
that.
I kind of have the opposite thing about evolution. Evolution excited me because I've been such a jack chick wielding
Oh, yeah.
Baptist about, oh, this is all nonsense. And to just be able to embrace it, not just embrace it, but just see how amazingly fascinating it is where we came from, how we know that's the case. I mean, archaeology too, same thing. It's like, it's so fascinating to me to see how we know what we know and how well we know it. Are we super certain about it, or is it just purely providence? Just being able to have that on a continuum and being able to provisionally give your support until a better answer comes along. That's such a that's so much better than this is the truth and we've preached it and we have always preached exactly that and it will always be true. You know.
Well,
Yeah.
it created quite a stir when we were living on the Bible College campus in Alberta, and my youngest daughter was digging around in the backyard, and she started pulling out bones, and
Oh,
she pulled out, and we found dinosaur bones.
get out!
We did, and we called the paleontologist from the Royal Turrell Museum in Alberta, and they came to our little mobile home there, and they took a look. We had all the bones spread out on the table, and they took the ones of the most interest, and they said it was an ankylosaur or
Oh, that's so
ankylosaurus, and
cool.
they gave us free passes to go to the museum, and we could see where they kept the bones. But I was very busy categorizing how all that worked in my very fundamental
I am
brain.
so jealous, Janice. That's amazing.
It
Yeah.
was pretty cool, pretty fun, but it was also kind of confusing. And it still was many years after that until I
Yeah.
divorced religion and then embraced atheism.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happened with were you in a religious school when you had that epiphany, or were you in regular university, secular
No, I was in
university?
it was junior college, actually. I was just about 20 years old or so. Um, so thank goodness I didn't go to California Baptist College like my folks did. That would have been a
Yes.
whole thing.
Yeah. So it didn't have an impact on what you were studying? Like you went ahead and is your degree in
My
history?
degree's in history, yeah. Um, and yeah, I think it came right at the right time before I, got into college and decided what I wanted to study. Because it just really opened up my mind to everything. And yeah, it was exciting time to be alive.
Yeah. And then how long was it after that until you became more outspoken as an advocate for things related to atheism?
I think that started in the 90s when I moved to San Francisco and I bumped into a local atheist group. And instantly we just clicked like a house on fire. And before you knew it, I was an atheist activist and speaking out in public about things. And after 9/11, it really ramped up too, because all of a sudden religion was just not cute anymore. And it was important it felt important to spread the news about that.
Oh my gosh. And then I look at things now and we've got things that feels like have gotten even
Yes,
worse or more precarious.
We are living in crazy buckets time that I never thought we would be so off the rails as we have been. The fact that Trump is not in prison already and hasn't been for like 2 years, I don't understand that at all. The fact that we're even rolling the dice. I mean, Kamala is going to crush him. America is going to crush. He's not going to. He's not. But the fact that we even have to have conversations like this, things are very, very wrong, and there's to be fixed. Supreme Court in the government. But let's stick with religion. Let's jump into politics. Yeah,
we're in Canada watching and going, "Are you okay over there?"
Right, right. Yeah, it's like living above a meth lab. Yeah, exactly.
And it is related. I mean, religions are rooted in magical thinking, and so we know that humans crave certainty, security, order, and acceptance.
Absolutely.
And religion and conspiracy theories and cults tie those up with a shiny red bow.
They sure do. And the biggest takeaway from the book I'm writing now, Playing God, is that all our major world religions, they all look different. They have different vocabulary, different music, different theology, different looks and scriptures. But when you look at the big picture and zoom out, and look at their origins and their development, they all look exactly the same because they all are following the same process. The outcome may be different. They may worship a different deity and have different rules about it, but how they got there from point A to point B just seems very predictable.
And is that only for the Abrahamic religions or for Eastern ones too?
Eastern and Western. The book, hey, I'll just flash it.
Please do.
In plug mode here.
Playing God. Mm-hmm.
Playing God, yeah, it's
there we go.
Even trying to show
An evolutionary history of world religion.
Yeah, it's a 3-part book. And in book 1, I talk about these evolutionary stages that all the world's religion seems to have gone through, from prehistory, even pre-humanity, all the way up to, just by virtue of being a social animal, these evolutionary strategies that got co-opted later by religion. And how, when you're the size of your group, if you're a family size, to a clan size, to a tribe size, to a city-state, to an empire, as your society keeps getting more and more inclusive and grows bigger and bigger and starts to include people who are not like you, especially when you start seeing religions become more transcendent. And it's like, it's not just a river god anymore, not just a mountain god, it's a god of everything. And he loves everybody, Before that, you can tell, it's like, tell me who your God is and I'll tell you what level of society your culture's in. And that's really fascinating to me. Just the evolution of monotheism. We think of it as like, well, first we worshiped everything, and then we had a pantheon, and then we had the one true God. And it's nowhere near that straight of a path. It's such a zigzag, and there's such a spectrum of beliefs of how many gods there are and who's on your side and who's not. And how it goes back and forth, and how Judaism was not the first monotheism. Moses was not the first monotheist. And yeah, I think we jumped over the whole fact that I went from being an atheist to being an atheist who doesn't think Jesus existed. And that blew my mind as much as losing my faith had 16 years before.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So around 2000, 2000, I started getting really curious about which of the Gospels is giving us the real Jesus, because they're not all talking about the same guy, and clearly they can't all be right, because they're talking about very different dude doing very different things in very different circumstances. So which one is the real one? That's what I was curious about, because I liked Jesus. I mean, as an atheist, he seemed like a cool guy, and I was so sad that his last words were, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I felt really bad for him. And then, as I say in the book Nailed, once you start pulling at that thread, pretty soon you have no sweater, because like one of the things I found out was, oh, those weren't really his last words. That's just the opening to the 21st Psalm. Oh, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John weren't really the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are names that got attached to them, generations later. Little red flags like that started popping up as soon as I tried to parse out what was the real Jesus and what was the legendary accretion that came later. And so long story short, about 2 years out into that process, I found out, oh yeah, I'm not the first person to wonder if there was a Jesus or not. And there's all this whole movement called Jesus mythicism that argues that Jesus didn't exist at all. And so 10 years down the road of talking about that and talking with other people about that, I wrote a book called Nailed, 10 Christian Myths That Show Jesus Never Existed at All. Wow. No hyperbole, not trying to be provocative. That's literally what I think, that he did not exist at all.
Wow. And people don't like to hear that, by the way.
Not. And, I wasn't surprised that Christians didn't like to hear that, because, but I was very surprised how much atheists didn't like to hear that, and how much pushback I got from our fellow atheists about, oh, no, there was definitely a guy named Jesus, but he wasn't the Son of God, but there's definitely a guy. So I immediately set out and wrote a sequel to Nailed called Jesus, Mything in Action. And in that one, that turned out to be...
I love that title.
Thank you. And once you come up with a title like that, you have to write the book, right? But I wrote it wound up being 3 books. And the first book talks about Jesus in the Gospels, Jesus inside the rest of the New Testament, and then Jesus sort of in the first century context. And if we had a time machine and went looking for the origins of Christianity, what would we find? And in that book, that's got all the footnotes. It's got all the deep dives into the question. And that said, it's not really important if there was a Jesus or not. We'll be just fine, atheists, whether there was one or not. But what does make it important, first of all, it's fascinating to see where Christianity really came from, and to see how much of it is just plain, straight up made up, and how we know that to be the case, and the evidence for that, and where the stuff came from as well. The more we learn in that back and forth between people who insist that there was a Jesus and people who insist that no, there was never a Jesus, is everything we learn in that debate, it helps us to debunk anybody who says, oh yeah, I know Jesus and I know he knows how you should act and vote and behave, believe. All those things helps debunk what we can and can't know about the real Jesus, whether there was one or not, whether Christianity is true or not. And again, the deeper you look, the more it seems like you're barking up the wrong tree if you insist there had to have been a Jesus, let alone that Jesus was the Son of God, let alone that Christianity is a one true faith. It's just, there's so many things between there and now.
Oh, yeah. And even within Christianity, there's so many different interpretations and ideas behind it. And you get some people like my mom who are just like, oh, it's just all about love. And then some people like my dad who are, it's all about rules. You got to follow the rules.
Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know about how it's a human creation? For sure. For sure.
And I think it's interesting too, that if I'm remembering right from The Power of Myth, the idea that first there were goddesses, and then at some point, nope, switched over to, oh, there's God and he's male, and then women lose all any authority, agency, power they might have.
Now, that said, I don't know if goddesses were the first, but there definitely were ancient goddesses, and that we definitely have physical evidence for. I get into playing God. Talk about the different stages that we seem to see in like the earliest hunter-gatherer societies, all the way up to the different levels of society. But one of the interesting fun facts I came across in that is in ancient Israel during the 7th century BC or BCE, if you will, the number one most common artifact we find in Israel and Judah are goddess figurines, hundreds of them. Yeah, it's the number one by far.
Wow, and like fertility goddesses, or we don't know what
goddesses, or like Anat or Asherah, different versions of fertility goddesses, which means, among other things, we have more evidence for goddess worship in 7th century BC Judah than we do for anybody in the Old Testament from Abraham all the way through Solomon. We have nothing as on the same par as we do for that.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
And so then when you were looking at how the many different religions that there have been, since humans have been walking around on Earth, is your understanding of it that typically gods came into being, people made them up when there were either things they couldn't understand or that they wanted to control a person or population? Or
first, it was things they couldn't understand, because at the earliest level, there's no such thing as religion. They believe in gods. They believe everything is a god to a varying degree. That maybe there's a creator god who created everything, but mountains are gods, rivers are gods, the forest is God, this is God, that's a god. Or they believe everything has a soul, like the rocks have a soul. There's variations of that, but there's no one claiming to be the in-between guy who can speak for them. There's no religion. Gods aren't worshipped. They're just bigger than we are. It's like the weather. It's like we have no control over that, but we have no expectation we can influence it one way or the other. When you get shamans, that stage, all of a sudden you have a guy saying, yeah, let me, I talk to the gods and, give me some shekels here and I'll cure your hang up or make sure good things happen to you. And when the shaman and the chieftain hook up, or if they're one and the same, that's when we start getting religion. And that's when things really start getting ugly from a historical context.
Wow.
Ugly / fascinating / ugly again. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like as I look at Christianity, and Islam and
Sure.
Judaism, girls and women suffer. They are the ones that are robbed of any power. And then even when we're looking at things like the Salem witch trials and stuff like that, powerful men wanting the property of women who happen to own property, and just being able to spew and twist whatever words and say that they are divining them from God and the Bible. And boy, that's rough.
Yeah, history reeks with it. And I'm always so jealous. It's almost always women who were raised like I was, and it just never took, because they were smart enough to say, "Yeah, I don't think so. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up." And
I think that indoctrination can be so powerful, and when we're also raised in a home perhaps that has a degree of physical or emotional violence or threats of violence for doubting, that can really prevent us. Those are booby traps in our mind to prevent us from pulling on that string that you mentioned in the sweater, that thread there. And that's out of self-protection. We don't even feel like safe to question.
And there's such a Venn diagram of white supremacy, of sexism. It's, you name it. And that's not to say religion is all bad, but you don't need the bad. If religion was true, we wouldn't need all that bad, toxic stuff. The good things you come out of Christianity or Buddhism or whatever, fill in the blank, they're good, and they're true whether you sign aboard on the whole raft of belief or not.
It's humanism.
It's humanism.
That's good.
Exactly. And there's a great quote this German theologian says, religion tends to make good people better and bad people worse. And I just love that, because that's one thing. A takeaway from this is like, is religion good or bad? Yes, it can be good, it can be bad. And the most successful religions are the ones that not only are enforced and like have all these rules, but they also provide something that people can appreciate, the one that had that trade-off between you will obey, and if you do, you get this reward, the carrot and stick of that. Because not all ancient religions had the carrot. Some were all stick,
Wow. Yes. And so I work in mental health. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. So I'm working with people who typically have spent time in authoritarian type of religion. So that could be some form of Christianity or other religion. Often they were raised in it, but not always. But they did spend significant time in it, and they've realized that it's not accurate. They were taught it was accurate, and so they are, like you said, the bottom dropping out of the airplane. People can have such a tremendous time of existential angst and depression when they start to think. And for me, it was when I realized, I don't think there is a hell. I was totally joyful, but then when I realized, maybe that also means there's not a heaven. Then that was a real crisis for me, because that's how I had organized my grief and loss. It was like,
you'll all get balanced out in the end.
We'll see each other again. It'll be fine. So it's a lot to cope with and to deal with when we realize the things that we were taught by people who were important in our lives, our elders, teachers, parents,
trusted figures.
Yeah. And so then there could be an element of betrayal trauma that we feel as well, because we believed them and they taught us something that was inaccurate.
There's a great play called Sister Mary Ignatius Explains It All for You. And it's about a woman who's the atheist, and she goes back to the school reunion at her parochial school, and she confronts her beloved mentor, Sister Mary. And one of the lines is, "You told me lies and I believed them." He said, you're my number one star pupil. What happened to you? And said, you told me lies and I believed them. And that, for me, like, I don't feel like I think I was very lucky. I did not have a traumatic religious upbringing. I had an extended family. It was really beautiful. But the fact that they told us lies and I believed them, that is hard to get away from. And it's hard to let God off the hook. He's done a lot of fucked up things, but not existing, that I can't forgive him for,
Yes. And reality. So when I'm working with clients, I'm encouraging them to embrace reality-based thinking rather than magical thinking. Unfortunately, there are a ton of people working as mental health clinicians who are either still religious or very much engaged in woo. You know what I mean by woo?
I do.
And I think it's really part of my job to help people come to terms with reality, accepting reality as it is.
This is what being a grown-up is seeing the world as it is and dealing with it,
Yeah, not
and
as
I
we
get
wish
the
it
world
were.
can be scary. It's fantastic and wonderful and exhilarating and terrifying and horrible and beautiful. And it's all those things all at once, all the time. And that's a lot to process when you don't have some big super omnibenevolent, omnipowerful, omniscient super God in your corner. When you realize, wait, it's just us. Oh my goodness, it's all so much.
Don't forget the R word, random. People hate that. That's where people feel like they have no control, no agency. What am I even doing here? If anything random can happen. But that is sometimes how life is, even though we don't like it. And so that's where people really gravitate to religion, because they want a worldview that makes sense to them and makes them feel safe.
Bingo.
I understand.
I like to tell people, I think most Christians, but actually most believers, full stop, have good, rational, real reasons for being believers that have absolutely nothing to do with their religion being good or rational or real.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because it's just what they were raised in, and it's so they were conditioned to it. And it's also the expectation
Yeah.
that's placed on them. And church is a club. And you're
It's a
either a
tribe.
member or you're
It's,
not a member.
exactly. It's your identity. It's your family. It's your tribe. It's your whole worldview. It's like when you talk to Mormons, you can't just poke a few holes in the archaeology and think they'll break out. You're criticizing their entire identity, their entire worldview, their entire history of the planet. When you point out that, yeah, that's not true.
Is
Yeah,
that what you did, a book specifically on Mormonism? I was surprised to see
I
that.
did, in fact, write a book on Mormons, and I talk about the early Mormon history and just how Mormon archaeology is an oxymoron, and how the whole thing basically is steampunk Scientology. And it's a fun book, and it's like Christians who hate my books about Jesus, they love my book on Mormons. Yeah,
Of course they do, because every other religion is a cult.
This is the thing,
except yours.
and it's so funny. I've gotten so many critiques from this atheist or this Christian about how, well, when he writes about this, it's brilliant, but when he writes about Jesus mythicism, it's crazy nonsense. And when this book, Playing God, came out, I got a review from a Buddhist who says, oh, when he writes about Islam, oh, brilliant, 10 out of 10, I love it. But when he writes about Buddhism, it's like a Mad Lib. It's like a Mad Lib, and a Christian fills it out one way and a Buddhist will fill it out the other way, but it's the exact same points.
Are there questions in the Eastern religions? I'm thinking of Buddhism around the beginnings, the origins, the founders. People even are some people who were raised Buddhist thinking, yeah, I'm not even sure the Buddha was really a real person.
I'm so glad you asked that, because one of the side effects of being a Jesus mythicist for so many years is how many times Buddhists would come up to me and say, yeah, we're having the same debates in our circles about whether the Buddha exists or not. Having ex-Muslims come to me and say, yeah, it's funny, we're having the same debates in our circles whether Mohammed existed or not.
Wow.
And so those two things have been rattling around for a while. 3 years or so ago, I was writing a book on sex and violence in the Bible, but all these new discoveries about the origins of Judaism and the origins of Islam started coming out, so much so that I got so excited, I stopped writing my sex and violence book, started writing this book, Playing God. And the takeaway now that I want people, when they read this book, is that it looks like it's the norm for major world religions to start out with a purely imaginary, made-up founder figure.
Wow.
Because it's not just Jesus. It's Judaism. It's Islam. It's Buddhism, it's Jainism, it's Hinduism, maybe not Hinduism because that doesn't have a founder figure, but it's across the board. All our top 10 major world religions have either no founder figure or they have a very, very dodgy backstory to their founder figure.
And how did they figure that out? Just by tracing everything back as far as they could and see what evidence there is?
Yeah, well, you've heard of the religion, maybe you have or haven't, Zoroastrianism. It's ancient Persian religions that most people haven't heard of. But
I thought that's where Judaism came from.
That is where Judaism came from. We wouldn't have Judaism, Christianity, or Islam if it weren't for Zoroastrianism, because there are direct, undeniable parallels that are taken straight from Zoroastrianism in all three religions, as they developed. All four of them developed over time. One of the things that blew my mind, I didn't realize going into this project, was Zoroastrianism, this thing that came out of basically Central Eurasia, like the Iranian steppes, northwestern India. It's also the founding, what led to early Brahmanism and early Buddhism. So it's like the mitochondrial Eve. There's this wishbone. It's not the oldest religion. It's not the very first, but it's the oldest common ancestor of all our major religions today.
Wow.
Which blows my mind and it really fascinates me. So in these three books, I talk a lot about the evolutionary stages of everybody, and then monotheism and what a weird zigzag that is, and how many other monotheisms could have been the one true God that we worshipped. And then the rest of the book, the other two books, are just looking into the founder figures of all of them, going into the Old Testament and say who's real and who's not in the Old Testament, and coming to the conclusion that most of them and all the ones we love are not real at all. Full stop.
No, Moses.
know Moses, and that the story of Moses is fascinating. I do a deep dive of that in the book. And it's all so much younger than we expected. There's two scholars that I'm really in love with right now, Russell Gmerkin and Jonathan Adler, this Tel Aviv archaeologist. And both independently of each other, Russell, by looking at the textual evidence for the first 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, has argued that these books that we think of as the first books of the Bible are all clearly based off of these, at least these other 2 books, and off of Plato, and could not have been written earlier than the year 273 or 272. That's how pinpoint it is. Wow. BCE in Alexandria, Egypt. Time and place and his arguments for it are just totally tracked.
Incredible.
And it's like there really is no Judaism. And at the same time, like a year into this project, Jonathan Adler launches this bombshell in Israel about how archaeologically we have no evidence for Judaism before the 3rd century BC or so. Completely dovetails with Russell Gmerkin saying, and it completely tracks with everything we've known about how the Moses story is not real history. And it seems to be based off these other 2 books here that were written just a few years before that.
I think what confuses people is that, I mean, Egypt is a real place. So Jericho, Jerusalem, those are real places. So people say, well, then those things are real. So the whole thing must be real and literal. And
it's even worse than that. A lot of archaeologists in the 20th century would say, oh, we found this place here where the Bible says this place should be here. Therefore, we found this place. And the circularity is just, they do that kind of thing all the time. And yet, the more we find out about other cultures like the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Assyrians and the Babylonians, the more we get their history. There's like entire libraries written well before the Bible was written in cuneiform. And that's how we know, for instance, that the Noah story is taken from the Gilgamesh story. And that's just, that's just a small example. That's how we know that Samson is really an avatar of the god Shamash, and all his story is basically a sun god story. Just in the same way, Hercules is a literary figure, and they compared the similarities and differences between those 2 as well.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating, and I'm tripping over my tongue because there's so many rabbit holes we could go down. Oh, I want to tell you this, and I want to tell you this, and that's just Judaism. It's like same thing with Christianity, same thing with Islam. Islam blows my mind in that there doesn't seem to have been a real Mohammed. And for the first 60 to 80 years of Islam, or I should say, for the first 80 or 60 years of the Arab conquest, when the Arabs are conquering that area and creating an empire, there doesn't seem to be a religion of Islam as we know it now. That seems to come pretty much gets invented about 80 years after the fact, 60 years after the fact, by a completely different dynasty than the first dynasty of the Arab conquests.
Wow.
That was the biggest thing for me, is like we know the Arabs conquered, so we know we have family trees of Muhammad, and we know all the leaders were related to him and his brother or whatever have you. But it seems like the further you go back into early Islam, the less you find, and the more his origin story just does not hold up at all. Mecca, Medina, his family, the Quraysh, none of that seems to match reality at all.
Do you ever get threats for poking holes in people's beliefs about their own history?
When I was an activist in San Francisco, we get death threats every now and again from somebody from the South would send us a letter and then forget that he had his whole his business on the bottom of his email,
Oh, no.
But it's not as many as you would think. And it seems like I've just for the Jesus thing alone, because that's been the bulk of my career, is arguing there was no Jesus. By far, it seems to be I get more pushback from atheists who say, "Oh no, that's crazy talk." They lump it in with Holocaust denial and the flat eartherism. But here's the fun thing: I wrote Nailed in 2010, and it shocked me how much pushback I got from atheists saying, "Oh yeah, there was a Jesus, but yeah, he wasn't son of God, but there was a Jesus." When I wrote the follow-up book, in response to those atheist arguments, even before it hit the shelves, the response was, "Oh, yeah, I never thought there was a Jesus." And that was just 7 years. And that's how much of a
Wow.
sea change it was. Um,
Interesting.
and
Wow.
you could say the same thing like 30 years ago. Actually, I'm getting more like 50 years now. Everybody thought there was a Moses, and then that flipped on a dime almost during the 70s and 80s, and we realized, oh yeah, the Exodus didn't happen, couldn't have happened because reason. And nobody in Europe for a long time instantly thought there was a Moses. That the Jesus thing is just a few decades behind that. It's bigger because you can't have Christianity without Jesus. Maybe you can have Judaism without Islam. I mean, without Mohammed, without Moses, without Moses.
Yeah.
But saying there was no Jesus, that's a big pill for anybody to swallow, even atheists.
Oh, and especially in such a religious nation as
Yeah.
the United States. Even though, I mean, I keep hoping, and it looks like in fits and starts, the United States it's evolving, it's getting to a point where the majority of people are going to be saying, no, we don't take that seriously.
It's fun. And I think you're right. I think that's exactly what's happening. But I remember after 9/11, and when I was working for the Secular Student Alliance, every year they would check the Pew results, and the measurements for openly religious, spiritual but not religious, and openly atheist used to be like up here. But by the time I left in around 2013, it was dead heat, and they were going down. Atheism was going up, and I haven't checked it, but that's seems to be where the sea change is going. The younger generation is the least religious generation in human history, apparently.
Right.
So that's exciting stuff.
Fantastic.
I've got one last thing. Even when that was happening, something occurred to me. It's like, so Christianity is shrinking, but the problem is it's shrinking in terms of the most empathetic, liberal, smart ones. Your moms are the Christians who are leaving.
Yeah.
And the ones who are left are the ones who are like your dad. And it's just dwindling down to the nutty, crunchy, fundy center.
Yeah.
And
gosh.
The analogy I used was piranha pools. In South America, there's places where the kids swim in the same pools with the piranhas. And that's fine. But when summer comes and the pools shrink down to when it's very, very small, that's when they'll skeletonize a cow in 2 minutes flat.
Yeah, it is.
Because
good.
It's scared and small and mean. And we're seeing that in Trump land,
right?
Exactly what's happening.
Yeah, as people have concerns about their relevancy, their rights. I got my air quotes going. Right. Their power, when they feel that is in danger of being stripped away.
People making fun of them when they're afraid that people are going to do to them what they've always done to all the other people.
Yeah, it's true. I'm wondering about so Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, and Seventh-day Adventism. Did that all come about kind of in a similar time in the United States? Was it the Millerites?
Actually, yeah. There was this one place called the Burned Over District in upstate New York, and this whole slew of different religions came out of that same time and place. In the early 1800s, this kind of utopian. It was a brand new baby country, and they were just kind of getting their feet going, and just a lot of interesting, crazy religious revival things were happening.
I really hope that Jehovah's Witnesses, that organization, continues.
They came a little later, but
I hope they continue to shrink.
I think they are.
I worry that in developing countries, because I see Pentecostalism really taking root in a lot of developing countries, it's just terrible. But I think Jehovah's Witnesses might too. And it really just preys on people's fear. And then sometimes also the promises that, if you embrace this, wonderful things will happen.
There's a phenomenon called rice Mormons. It's so missionaries go to a place like Africa or Asia, and they get all these new converts right off the bat because they feed you at the church, and you get that thing. But when you look at like how many new priests are coming out of the converts, you don't see that happening. Mormonism only seems to be growing by the amount of kids that Mormons have that don't leave the faith. Even though they all claim to be the fastest growing religion in the world, none of them are. All of them are shrinking.
Right. And that does make me think, do you have things to say?
It's really interesting what you brought up, because in 50 years, it's kind of a fluke of history that this Middle Eastern religion went to Europe at one point, and all of a sudden Europe all became Christian, because we're seeing the opposite thing now. Now it's going to Korea. Now it's going to South America. Now it's going to sub-Saharan Africa. In 50 years, those may be the Christian places on the planet. And we won't see white Jesuses. We'll see Korean Jesuses and black Jesuses and South American Jesuses.
Yeah. And I mean, the Scandinavian countries they have my bet for being the best places to live, because they seem to have really embraced secular humanism as a philosophy rather than religion. And Americans, I got to say, I love the United States, but there's a huge fear around socialism. And I'm like, you know what? In Canada, we have free healthcare and all sorts of stuff like this. It's actually a wonderful thing. You don't need to be scared of some of these things.
And I think the college-age kids are not afraid of it. They see full well what capitalism has done to this planet and to their lives. And yeah, I have high hopes that's going to change. And I think that's why I'm so outspoken about religion, especially because so much of our human history, politics, and religion's gone hand in glove. And that's why people put up with it, is because religion tells them to. And this is one way of dismantling that. And so, yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic for the future. Before Trump got elected, I mean, I was blindly optimistic, because it just seemed like things were just getting better and better and better and better. But boy, what a left turn we took off the guardrails. I never thought it would get this bad.
And whatever, I mean, you guys sneeze over there and we catch cold over here. We have similar stuff that goes on. We have our very devout religious folks and people who also have now been very swayed by misinformation and fallen down conspiracy theory rabbit holes. I wonder if something was helpful for you in informing your critical thinking, because when we're in religion, critical thinking isn't really encouraged.
Quite the opposite. It's actively discouraged. And that's its strength and its weakness at the same time, because you can do some theological judo and flip that on. It's like, oh, faith is good. Well, what's blind faith? And why is that bad? And what's the difference between faith and blind faith? That kind of thing. Lost my train of thought, but basically.
I was wondering about resources that you might recommend for critical thinking.
Sure. One thing, say what you will about the internet, the fact that it puts every single atheist on the planet in touch with every single other atheist on the planet, that's a great thing. Even though it's like herding cats, we don't all agree on anything. Sometimes don't agree on anything. And that can be frustrating, but it's wonderful too. And being able to, just have encyclopedias at our fingertips, being able to fact check a pastor in real time from your pew on your phone, that's astounding. And religion is on the ropes, and it knows it is. And the younger people are just not buying it. They might fall for some woo thing. They might fall for some crazy right-wing whatnot. But slowly we're breaking down some of the traditional toxic things in our culture. And it gives me hope for the future. If we can get through what we're going through now, this rise of authoritarianism, and just the sheer cultishness of it, and that they are so fact-proof. It's like they don't even care if it's true or not. And that terrifies me. That's something I'm used to. I for critical thinking, I like a website called Thinking is Power, thinkingispower.com. She's wonderful. I love her. I absolutely love that woman. She is if you can ever get a chance to see her speak, run, don't walk, because she is fantastic.
Yeah, Melanie Tresek King, I think is
Krista
her
King,
name.
yeah, she is a
She's
treasure.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Recovering
Mhm.
from Religion Foundation. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
have to tell you about those guys. They do
Mhm.
fantastic work. American Atheists, all the major groups, secular humanists, American Humanist Association,
Yeah.
all
Is
those.
CFI still operating?
Yep, they are.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and they're all worth supporting. They're all worth looking for. The Secular Student Alliance.
Black
There's a lot.
non-believers. Mhm.
There's a lot of great resources at your fingertips for anybody who's trying to make sense of all this.
Right.
And again, be gentle on yourself, because you're reshaping your whole universe, and you'll figure it out. But
Oh, those are such kind words of support. And I'll encourage people too. So some folks might be listening to this podcast. They might not know that I actually also have a YouTube channel that's called Divorcing Religion. And that's where the video episodes of the Divorcing Religion podcast go, as well as sessions from my conferences, the Conference on Religious Trauma and Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture, all the former sessions. Those also are on my YouTube channel. It's just a great resource for people recovering from religious trauma or curious about religious trauma. And now I'm so excited that I'm going to be able to add this episode to that resource.
I'm delighted and honored to be a part of it. Thanks so much for being here and having this.
Yeah, it's been a joy. Now, how can people find you?
I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on Facebook. That's probably the easiest way to find me. If people have questions, want to contact me directly, you can send an email to everybodylovesdave@gmail.com. I've got a website. It needs to get updated more frequently than it does, davidfitzgerald.org. On YouTube, if you Google it, my name, you'll find a lot of talks that I've given, including that sex and violence talk called Sexy Violence, Violent Sex, the Weird Ass Morality of the Bible.
That sounds good. Yes.
Easy to find.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I encourage people to look you up and to support your work, to buy your books. Your books sound phenomenal. Oh, and then just quickly tell us, what are your fiction pieces that you have out there?
Sure. I've got a science fiction trilogy I wrote with my wife called Time Shards. Super fun. A time travel romp, sort of a post-apocalyptic time travel mashup, where you have all these characters from all these different times and periods, and they're this ragtag gang that's trying to cross this post-apocalyptic time jumbled world to save the world. It
sounds fun.
It's super fun. It was the toughest book to write, because when you're writing a nonfiction book, you have to have footnotes and you have to do research and all these dots, and T's crossed. With science fiction, you just have to make it all up. But when you do a time travel book, you have to make it all up and you have to do all the research too. So it was the worst of both worlds, but I love that trilogy so much. It's such a fun read.
Very cool.
And we've also written other things. We can maybe attach that to the end of this clip. And if anybody wants to, especially my nonfiction, if you want to buy it directly from me and get an autographed copy, I'm totally happy to do that. And I can usually get it to you cheaper than what you'd pay for it on Amazon anyway. So
wonderful. So people can reach out to you by email if they're interested in doing that. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you again for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
It's my honor. Thanks so much, Janice. Thanks for what you do. Take care.
That's my honor, my pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. And remember, if you are recovering from religious trauma yourself, if you're ready to start doing some of that important work, come to my website, divorcingreligion.com, and we can figure it out together. Thanks again, and take care, everyone.